and then about some difficulties with pragmatism. Richard Bernstein, who is at Haverford College, used to teach at Yale. Richard Bernstein has written on quite a lot on pragmatism, trying to adopt pragmatist emphases in his own thinking, and in doing so has listed 5 contributions of pragmatism. Now, I take it these are contributions to his own thinking. You may not think them contributions, all of them, but some of them at least. The first is its rejection of foundationalism, and you're noticing how that theme keeps recurring. It'll be in the existential tradition as well, of course. The rejection of foundationalism, that tradition that comes down to us from Descartes of trying to logically deduce everything else from certain indubitable foundations. The second contribution, it's fallibilism. Fallibilism is the view that all human judgments are fallible, so that there is no logically indubitable certainty. And of course that's part of the rejection of foundationalism. But of course the pragmatist, accepting fallibilism, thinks that the pragmatic approach is a self-corrective process, because the active implementation and experimentation with an idea, like a hypothesis, is obviously going to be a corrective on premature overassurance, dogmatisms, so forth. The third contribution he lists is the social character of the self. That is to say, breaking with the isolated, atomistic view of an individual, Robinson Crusoe theory, and seeing the self rather as a locus within a whole complex of social relationships. This is particularly evident in Dewey. And I think it's understandable that in any Hegelian influence movement that you'll find this kind of renewed attempt to spell out the notion that we are social beings rather than isolated individuals. The atomism of the 18th century is rejected by virtue of the Hegelian kind of emergence of an individual in the course of history. If you like, going back to Hegel's conception of the concrete universal, the individual is the historical realization of universal possibilities from the past, so that universality and particularity combine in the individual. Remember Hegel's thesis, antithesis, synthesis of universal, particular, individual. And inasmuch as these universal possibilities are relationships to other humans within society, then the individual is that way. Just as a problem situation is not something isolated, but is posed by the whole network of relationships within which we exist. Biological relationships, psychological, sociological, environmental, so on and so forth. So that conception is significant. And tied to that, number 4, is the contingency in human life and human nature. Not only is life itself contingent on all sorts of things, but what I am as an individual is contingent on all sorts of things, genetic and environmental. And the same is true of human nature generically by virtue of Dewey's evolutionary naturalism, contingent on that evolutionary past. And then Bernstein's 5th contribution to pragmatism is its acceptance of pluralism, philosophical pluralism, ethical pluralism, religious pluralism, which is a phrase a lot of you are well familiar with after the conference last week. And that is to say, an acceptance of the fact that a variety of different viewpoints coexist, among which it is impossible to choose with any kind of logical certainty. And so there's a relativism about alternative positions, except insofar as a belief is experientially verified. But of course, keep in mind that even experimental verification does not conclusively validate a position, simply because a pragmatic test commits the fallacy of affirming the consequent. You're familiar with that. If in a hypothetical syllogism you're saying if A then B, and you say, yes, B is correct, therefore A, you're affirming the consequent, which logically is fallacious. If it rains, I shall get wet. I'm getting wet, so it's raining. Not at all. Somebody could have turned the hose on. All sorts of other ways of getting wet. So that the pragmatic test operating this way may establish some, if you like, probability that A is true, in a traditional sense of true. But certainly no certainty. But then the pragmatist is not interested in certainty. He's not interested in the traditional sense of true. So that contingency inevitably remains, and the pluralism remains. Well, this is saying that pragmatism is a kind of postmodernism. It's a kind of anti-realism. And certainly that's the direction in which it has subsequently been taken. I mentioned Richard Rorty, for instance, last time. And he is, I suppose, the anti-realist par excellence in contemporary thought. So these things. Bernstein's prepared to accept them all. I guess I'm prepared to buy the first 3.5, 4 of them. Rejection of foundationalism, fallibilism, the social character of the self, the contingency of human life, and so forth. My difficulties with pragmatism stem, of course, from its philosophical naturalism, from the underlying naturalism, by virtue of which there is no intrinsic value to anything that exists. This, of course, is one of the accompaniments of philosophical naturalism, unavoidably. The locus of value, of course, is likely to be what the individual values. And Dewey is explicit about that. He refuses to talk of what is valuable, that implies intrinsic value, and only talks of what is valued. So that loss of intrinsic value is a concern. If there are no intrinsic values, no, take it back, if there are intrinsic values, then obviously pragmatism, which is only concerned with relative values, is not enough. And the relationship between theory and practice is going to be a lot more than pragmatic because of the intrinsic value. But that leads to the second difficulty, that pragmatism's not only rejecting intrinsic values, but is accepting only the situational value of a belief or idea. So that every situation can be different, as if life is made up of a whole lot of discrete situations, each different from the other. It's a kind of atomism of its own. And as such, I think it fails to see the orderedness that there is in human existence. That is to say, there are universal kinds of situations, universal kinds of desire, therefore universal kinds of values, you see, interrelated within the unity of the whole. My complaint is that Dewey doesn't have enough of the interrelatedness. This is one of the consequences of naturalism. But if there are universal types of problem situations, universal human needs, values, then this is indicating something of a teleology that runs throughout human existence and nature, such as would imply that we have not just isolated problem situations, but an overall situation. The overall project of life has to be addressed, the meaning of life in toto, its purpose, not just what is desired in particular situations. So it seems to me the crux of the thing is the fact that naturalism denies intrinsic values, but once you get intrinsic values in an interrelated whole, you have a logos structure and a teleology, which is going to push you a lot beyond what a pragmatic method can accomplish. But let that be said in the context of certain appreciations. One other thing that I've long appreciated about pragmatism is its recognition of, talking of the intrinsic, an intrinsic connection between theory and practice. The tendency in Enlightenment thought is to think of theory for understanding's sake alone. And if there happens to be some application, well and good. Whereas I think one of the things I've learned from Dewey is that theoretical inquiry has as its natural stimulus, its natural habitat, if you like, life itself. So that the theoretical movement of thought is aroused by things that occur in the course of life, and as a result of which we find we stand back to try and understand what's going on. And the intellectual curiosity continues for largely theoretical reasons as well as practical reasons. But there is always the feedback loop of practice into theory and theory into practice. And I think that's well demonstrated by the history of philosophy, where you can see the relationship between crucial issues of the time and theoretical developments, as well in the stimulus of the theoretical direction, as in the feeding back of the theory into the practice. So I find Dewey helpful in that regard, keeping philosophy in life context. Now, those I see heads nodding as I say that. I see some eyes lighting up. I see some smiles on Ryan's face, and so forth. Anybody want to say something? No? Are you too captured by the second topic? Okay, let's move on to that. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be dealing with existentialism and phenomenology. Now, don't confuse the two. We met the term phenomenology in reference to Hegel. And we should therefore remember that phenomenology is a method, not a position. It's a descriptive method, rather than a philosophical theory. However, it's a descriptive method which was adapted and used by some of the 20th century existentialists. So our introduction to existentialism is going to have to be in terms of the 19th century roots in Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, both of whom are included in the Gardner Anthology, and both of whom you're going to be reading this week, are you not? I was wondering whether I asked you to do thesis statements. And in the light of all the reading I'm going to have to do, I've just spent 8 hours reading examinations for my other course, and now I'm going to have to read these book reviews of yours this week. I decided that the quality of mercy towards myself is not strained, even though I'd like you to do those thesis statements, but I wouldn't impose that on myself at this juncture. So, so I won't do so. But do read. You'll find them intriguing, helpful. I'll be referring to them as we go on. Existentialism was a largely European philosophy, and I say was, because it really was a philosophical movement that blossomed in the first half of the 20th century, and in many ways is now passé. I'm inclined to look upon the activist 60s as marking the end of existentialism. You see, if the pessimistic existentialist was saying life is meaningless, it has no purpose, the 60s had too many meanings and purposes. And so it seems to me that there was a phase out in that context. It's not been recovered. Existentialism is not primarily, however, a theoretical position, a theory, a set of doctrines. It's not primarily a school of thought. It's more a focus of attention, of concern. A focus, that is to say, on human existence. Not on the essence of human nature. Now, that would be essentialism, not existentialism. not focus on essence, but on existence, on the problem of human existence as we experience it. And so some of the phrases we've been meeting in Whitehead and Dewey are very appropriate. Concrete experience. Not that abstractive kind of experience that John Locke talked about, but concrete experience. And the idea of the self-consciousness being the lens through which everything else is viewed. Very appropriate. Because it's self-conscious existence. The consciousness of existing in this kind of a world. That's what the existentialist is concerned about. Existence that can be meaningless or inauthentic. And the question is, how can it be authentic? How can it give meaning? Or how can we give it meaning? So I think you can think of this existential focus as a philosophy of human existence. Philosophizing about human existence. Human existence in a broken world. What does it feel like to live self-consciously, inwardly, in this kind of a world? Waste places to yourself. And it's that self-consciousness of living in such a world is the thing. Do you, maybe it's too common an experience these days to be peculiar, but do you ever feel self-conscious in front of the camera? You see, I've gotten over being self-conscious in front of that thing. I just ignore it. Except now when I'm talking to it. But self-consciousness in the face of one's own dying. Yeah. I remember when we buried my father-in-law. I looked down into the dark hole after the casket was lowered and said to myself, well, next it's me, my generation. Now, it's that sort of self-consciousness which is not just an awareness, but an emotion-loaded awareness. You see? There's no self-conscious human existence that doesn't come loaded with feeling or anxiety or some other quality of that sort. What nowadays we call existential qualities of human existence. And so you find in the headings of the Kierkegaard selections words like dread, anxiety, melancholy. You see? Because these are the qualities of our self-conscious being. Now, what this is implying is that humans are not primarily rational animals ruled by reason. That Enlightenment vision is gone. We're not romantic creatures living in a romanticized kind of realm. Everything in the garden rosy. No, romanticism is gone. If you like, existentialism is romanticism turned sour. A pumpkin rotted. Now what's Cinderella going to do? And this feeling is augmented in technological society. I'm not sure that existentialism would ever have arisen before the Industrial Revolution. But in an industrialized technological society, there are themes like dehumanization, alienation. Yeah, that was a theme in Marx. Well, he and Kierkegaard were contemporaries, seeing different dimensions in the same problems. Alienation, ambiguity, meaninglessness. Because a self-conscious existence in an industrialized society with everything pressing in upon us is a world of fact without value, of existence without meaning, existence without essence. The Sartrist. And one German writer of this period, more a phenomenologist than an existentialist, Max Scheler, puts it this way: we are the first generation in which man has become fully and thoroughly problematic to himself, in which he no longer knows what he essentially is, but at the same time knows that he doesn't know, yet desperately wants to. Get the picture? Now, it's in that sort of a situation, the anguished self-consciousness at living in a broken world, it's in that sort of a situation that the approach of the existentialist is not going to be offering a theory, you see. You don't offer a theory to resolve existential anxiety.